again. Now today's video is a bit of an unusual one. I'm down with the Steam Boys. Let's call them the Steam Boys. They've got a little place down in Kent and they recondition steam engines, electric trains, a bit of everything today. Now I apologise if the channel's been a bit quiet recently due to the my ankle injury. I don't know if you saw the last video, but I'm lucky enough I've got the wife to drag me around to these sort of places without me having to drive, which is great. Now you can hear in the background noise. There's Peter up there and Mike up there arranging ladders, and we're doing a lift today. It's a boiler and it's coming off of a large crane. So thanks for coming along, I do appreciate it. And if you get a chance, like the video for me, I would appreciate it. And if you haven't already, think about subscribing to the channel. Doesn't cost you a penny or any of this. Anyway, let's get on with this video, shall we? Just one last thing. I'm going to introduce someone in a minute, and what we're going to do is going to tell us the history of the place and what's their end product going to be. Anyway, let's get on with this video, shall we? Thanks again. Cheerio for now. Well, good morning, Peter. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what the society is all about then, would you please?
Good morning. My name's Peter Spowage. I'm a director of Southern Locomotives Limited. Basically what we do, we restore locomotives and operate locomotives on preserved railways. This locomotive behind us is one of the last ones that we're going to be doing, which is actually Sir Frederick Pyle, a Battle of Britain class locomotive which was taken out of Barry Scrapyard in the 1980s, and it's been awaiting restoration. And over the last few months we've now taken over ownership of this locomotive, and this morning what we're going to be doing is we're going to be lifting the boiler and to start a full restoration of the engine. Now, Southern Locomotives actually operate 9 steam engines. We've got 4 working locomotives at the moment down at the Spowage Railway. We also have a locomotive which will be going back down to the Spa Valley Railway, and our engine 257 will be working the Polar Expresses, which are an incredible Christmas train over the Tunbridge Wells line down to Erridge over the Christmas time. So we're really looking forward to that.
Fantastic. Now, what made you get into steam and steam engines? Was it a family thing, or are you just interested in nuts and bolts?
No, this is going back to when I was a little kid. Basically at the age of 10 years old, when you used to get a ticket to go up to London, Mum would pack me a bag of sandwiches and I'd go and stand on the end of Waterloo platform, and I'd see locomotives like this coming in from the West Country in places like Oakhampton, Bude, Padstow, places that I've always, dreamt of going. They seem like a foreign country, and that really got me interested in steam locomotives, and really ever since then I've been hooked.
Now tell us, Peter, you've got a small band of people, volunteers here, have you? Now how many of you as a collective are there?
Well, in actual fact, our company has shareholders, which means that when people actually join the limited company, they become owners of these locomotives. Okay. So when you buy a share, you actually become a part owner of the steam locomotives which we own. So everyone can turn around and say, yeah, they're a part owner of 9 steam locomotives. And it makes you feel rather proud.
Of course. I mean, preserving the past, we all like preserving the past, because once people like you stop doing this, who's going to do it in the future, And what I've said to many people in the past is that what you've got in your head when you pass from this earth, it's all gone with you, and that's why we've got to document this sort of thing, haven't we? We've got to get around talking to people like yourself and your colleagues, and let's put it out on the channel and see what it's like. But I appreciate your time here today, Peter. Now you invited me down here. We met at the Tractor Fest in Kent, didn't we?
That's correct, under rather damp conditions.
Yes, but today the sun's coming out. So we look forward to the day, and you've got this crane turning up shortly, have you?
Yes, we have, yes.
Fantastic, so we'll get some lovely shots of that, but perhaps in a minute, what I'll do, I'll put the camera on the gimbal, and we'll have a wander around your yard if that's possible, and you could describe what you got in progress, what's not in progress, what's waiting for restoration and that sort of thing. Would you do that for me, Peter?
Be absolutely delighted.
Thanks ever so much. Well, we'll say we'll pause the video for now, and then I'll put it on again when we go from there, shall we?
Lovely job.
Thanks ever so much. Before you go, tell us your full name again, Peter.
It's Peter Spowage.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for your time.
This morning's operation is to remove the boiler off our Locomotives Sir Frederick pile. And what I'd like to do to you is to explain to you exactly how the boiler operates and why we need to remove it. This boiler that we have here is actually off our Locomotive Brocklebank line, which is at Merchant Navy class Pacific. Now what you have here, behind this bit here, is where the firebox is. Now the firebox has coal which is going to be burning in here, and it's going to be burning so that it can boil water. Now then, this is all surrounded by water, so you have a gap between the outer surface and the inner surface of the firebox of around about 4 inches, and that is all full of water. So think of this as a large kettle. So the fire heats up the water then turns into steam. The steam comes up to the top of the boiler, which is then released down to the cylinders at the front of the locomotive. And what we need to do is to remove this part of the locomotive so that we can get to the main engine bit, which I'll explain to you shortly. What you have running through the centre part of the boiler is tubes, and the tubes conduct the heat from the firebox right the way through, which also allows all of the water inside here to become steam. And as I've previously explained, the steam then rises to the top of the boiler, which then comes down to where the cylinders are. I'll take you now round to the front and I'll show you how the heat is transferred through the boiler. This is what you call a front tube plate. These tubes go right the way through the centre of the boiler, and what you've got to imagine that this is where the heat comes through. All around these tubes is water, and so you have a tremendous amount of pressure inside here. And when these locomotives were working, they were running at 250 pounds per square inch, so you can imagine the amount of power coming through just in steam alone.
Fantastic. Now, Peter, now you mentioned there, you know, from the layman's point of view, you said the tubes going down there. Now that's carrying the water, and the firebox is heating the space around the tubes, are they?
The heat is coming through the tubes.
The heat is coming through the tubes?
Yes. The heat is coming through here.
From the firebox in front?
Yes. Comes through here.
Yep.
The water surrounds all the tubes.
Fantastic. That's what I'm sort of trying to sort of feature on it. That's fantastic. Please carry on, Peter.
And then what you have that comes onto the front of here is where the smoke box is.
Right.
And where the smoke box is where you get the chimney. And this is where everyone recognises the steam locomotive, because this is where all the smoke comes out.
Yeah.
And that comes out because this is directly connected to the fire. And so when the smoke goes up, what it does, it draws the heat of the fire, which then sends it out through the chimney.
Now, what I've seen on steam engines for as a young man is that the steam comes out the chimney as well. Now, is the steam from the driving force pushed out the chimney as well?
Yes. Exhaust steam comes out through the chimney, which then catches hold of the fire.
Yeah.
And so it acts like a vacuum, which then allows...
Like a draft?
A draft, which then helps the fire burn.
Okay.
And so that's why it's so important that the chimney has to be right, all of this has to be clean, so it allows the fire to work. It's just like a fire at home, that when you start it in the old days when we were younger, you used to put newspaper over the front, which would allow the fire to draw up through the chimney. And that's exactly what happens here.
Now tell us about the lighting of an engine like this. Now back in the day when they were sort of putting these out on the rails and taking passengers around, what was the time period that to allow for getting the steam up in the morning before they actually set on their way?
If you were starting from cold, then normally you would take probably 7 hours to warm up an engine of this size to get it up to full working order from cold. Right. But what they used to do is these engines used to stay warm for at least 7 to 10 days. Now, once you've got them warm, once you've finished a journey and you put it to bed for the night, the next day you could have an engine back to full working pressure within maybe 2 to 3 hours.
Fantastic. Now, is that the engine driver's problem, or is that the stoker's problem? Does he have to come in early to do that sort of thing?
No, this is where in the old days you would have a team of people that would look after an engine like this. First thing you'd have would be a firelighter. Now the firelighter would come in probably around about 5 o'clock in the morning, and he would go around and look after maybe 10 locomotives, start all the fires going. It's his responsibility to make sure that the engine starts to get warm. So he doesn't do any of the oiling or anything like that, but he just makes sure that the fire starts getting warm. Then what you have is the driver and the fireman would then book on for duty. The fireman then will then start bringing up the power of the boiler, and so it wouldn't be ready for working, but probably about 60 or 70% there. He would then prepare the final bit. The driver would then go round his locomotive doing all the oiling up points and making sure that he knew every single part of that engine was ready to haul a passenger train.
Okay, so we're talking a few hours in the morning to get it on schedule, ready for the morning rush hour, let's say.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, now moving on. Now, obviously, there's a lot to be built up around this boiler, isn't it? And obviously, you've got to get it insured and checked before you can put it on the rails. Do you have a regular insurance chap who comes down and gives you a price?
Yes. Well, what happens is that we have to have a boiler checkout every 10 years. So the boiler would be passed for 10 years of work. And once you get to that 10-year period, then the locomotive comes out of traffic, and then we have to do what we're doing here, which is a major overhaul. The boiler then comes off and has to be inspected. Everywhere has to be checked. I mean, we're extremely lucky with these boilers because they're relatively young. These are only just over sort of like 50, 60 years old. But there are boilers around which are still just coming up to 120 years old, which are still in working condition.
Fantastic. Now, the side plate wall thickness, does that count on the insurance?
Yes, it does, very much so. That's one of the things that is measured. They do it electronically now, but they obviously have to make sure that there's no deterioration in the boiler barrel. Once it gets to a certain thinness, then obviously the boiler is scrap. But we're very lucky in the fact that these engines really didn't have a hard working life. They were only built in the late 1940s, early 1950s, and this one here was being scrapped by 1964.
Fantastic. Now, I'm sure you've said it in the past, but I'm a bit forgetful. Now, this engine. Now, what rail line did it get? Was it Southern? Was it?
Yeah, these locomotives were Southern locomotives.
Right.
So this particular engine used to run out of Waterloo. Fantastic. So it would have taken the expresses down to places like Salisbury, Exeter, Bournemouth, Weymouth. Taking some of the heaviest trains out of Waterloo. And even when they were finished in 1967, believe it or not, a locomotive with a similar boiler to this, called Royal Mail, was clocked at doing 106 miles an hour in the last week of its service before it went off for scrap.
Fantastic. Now, you've just answered the question what I was going to ask you next. When was the period between steam and electrification coming? But you've just mentioned it. It's 1967, was that? What was it earlier in that they were starting to fade them out, or was it sort of around that 60s period?
The 1960s was the period that locomotives were being phased out. This particular engine finished service in 1964, and the only reason it finished was purely and simply because it wasn't required for the summer timetable. Diesels were then coming in, and it was a perfectly good working locomotive. They just let it go cold, and then she was towed away for scrap.
Down to Wales, as we all know it, yes?
Yes, it went down to Barry Scrapyard. The problem being was, these locomotives were built to last into the 1980s. This was only rebuilt in the late 1950s. She only had a working life of just over 5 years, which is nothing for a steam locomotive. So we're very lucky, in actual fact, to have these engines that were withdrawn early because they're still in good condition.
Now, did it see any wartime period, this engine at all?
No, it didn't. No. These locomotives were built after the end of the war.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so we should move on from there, and we're going to have a walk around your yard, and you can tell me a little bit about the other engines you got in restoration at the moment, please.
Be delighted.
Fantastic.
Now this morning, as I said to you, we're going to remove the boiler of this locomotive. Now the reason we want to remove it is because we have to get to all the actual powerhouse of this engine. The boiler supplies steam. The steam then comes down through the top of the boiler and into these cylinders. These are the cylinders which actually power the locomotive. But we can't get to these cylinders whilst the boiler and the smoke box is in place. This particular engine has 3 cylinders. Now this is one of the outside cylinders, and you can see how it works. This is basically the push rod. This is the cylinder down here which supplies the piston. So the wheels are powered through here, and there's another one of these in the centre of the engine, and that's the one that we need to get to. So once we've lifted the boiler, it means we can get to the whole powerhouse of this particular engine.
Now, Pete, quick question before you move on. Now, I know you're probably going to answer this question probably in your talk, but is there a first stage piston and a second stage? So you've got a low, high piston and a low pressure pistons.
Now what you've got a series of valves which control the amount of steam which goes into the piston. So basically we can either shorten the piston or we can lengthen it. And basically that it's almost like starting a car in first gear. Yeah. So you can start it at a lower pressure, and then slowly you will start building up and up and up. So eventually you will get to a point that there is the maximum amount of pressure between the cylinder head and the piston, which allows maximum power to come through to the driving wheels.
And you're in 5th gear then by that time, aren't you?
You're in 5th gear and travelling fast, yes.
Fantastic. Now the size of these wheels that you're standing right behind you, if you could move to one side for a second. Now, what sort of diameter are these wheels? Now I see they're, in my size they're enormous, but is this a normal size wheel for an engine?
Yes, it would be. For a Pacific class locomotive, you know, a 6 foot, 6'1" driving wheel, that would be the normal size.
Really? And the diameter, that, what is it, 4 foot, 5 foot?
No, 6 foot.
6 foot, sorry.
Yeah. 6 foot, 6'1".
Yeah, fantastic.
And these wheels would be spinning at 100 mile an hour.
So what sort of weight would be in one wheel alone, or one axle? Let's say one axle.
One axle, you're looking at around about 12 to 15 tons.
My God, they definitely built things right in the back
yes.
in those days, didn't they? Now we're going back to the lifting of this boiler. Now the weight of the boiler is going to be
18 tons.
18 tons. Now you've obviously got a crane that you can manage that. Have you got some sort of spreader bars and that sort of thing? Or
yes, we do. Yes, which you'll see at a later stage.
Fantastic. Now, obviously, there's a shield that goes around. It sort of makes it look pretty, isn't it? Obviously, is that?
Yes. What you have boiler lagging. So it's very similar to what you've probably seen in other YouTubes with your traction engines. You have a lovely surround which is painted. And that's exactly what would happen to this. You have your boiler lagging, which in the old days used to be asbestos. Now it's a number of different type of fibres, like you put in your roof to try and insulate your roof. And then outside of that goes a lovely smooth metal casing which is painted, and that's what looks beautiful.
That's what makes it look pretty, doesn't it?
Yes.
We love a beautiful young lady, don't we?
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
You know, well, I appreciate that, and so from the start of restoration to the finish of restoration, what sort of period are we talking about? With
this particular engine, we're going to be looking at around about 5 years. So we've got about at least another year's work to do down here. Once we take the boiler off, we'll then be cleaning the inside of the frames, painting the inside of the frames, and preparing them to go down to our workshop at Hurston, which is near Spowage. Once she goes into Spowage, that's when they're going to start to put her back together. Okay, so this yard really is just like the prep work's done, sort of thing? That's correct, yes. We do the preparation work here, and we're preparing it for going into our workshop. So when we talk about the prep work, all the pistons, the rods, the driving force will be all fixed, ready to go down to be... We will do a lot of that work here, yes. Yeah, a lot of the preparation work. And all your volunteers, obviously? That's correct, yes. We appreciate that, and we move on to something else you can tell us all about it, please. Right, Pete, we're moving on now to one next door. Now, this looks impressive. You seem to have a bit of coat of paint on this one, Pete, and the boiler's gone. So, well, This locomotive here is Brocklebank line. This is the boiler that I was explaining to you earlier on. So the boiler has been removed and now we're down to the frames.
Yeah, let me just a wide angle of that. Fantastic. So
as you can see, these are the cylinders, and a lot of the equipment has been released. All the pistons and the slide bars have been released, so it means that we can actually start working on the pistons.
fantastic.
It also shows you here, this is where the wheels go.
Oh, the
So
axles. Yeah.
on these frames, this is what you call the horn guides.
Yeah.
And we have to do a lot of work on these to make sure that they're preserved.
Yeah.
So the wheels have been removed, and what we're doing now is making sure that all this is prepared, ready to go into the workshop. This is to show you as well how heavy these engines were. As you can see, all this support going around the axles, these were basically the Rolls Royce of steam locomotives. Our other locomotives were light Pacifics. These are the heavy boys. This is what you would call a Class 8 steam locomotive. Very similar to an engine called Clan Line, which some of you may well have seen on the main line, and it's been hauling Pullman trains around here in Kent. And looks absolutely amazing. And this is one of the sister locomotives to it.
In fact, when you was talking about being like a strong engine, strong frame, I was thinking about freight. These weren't hauling freight then, they was strictly passenger trains then, would they?
Yes, they were. These, the merchant navies, were passenger locomotives. And these were the ones that they had these incredible names. Port Line, Brocklebank Line, Clan Line. People could see these, and of course they would get on these trains and they would look at them. And of course this is what starts railway enthusiasm off, when you go and see the name of an engine. And you would see this name, you'd write it in your book. And then you'd try and get all the names of one particular class of engine. It was a marvellous time. It really was.
Absolutely fantastic. Now I'm going to ask you a bit about the cylinders themselves. Now obviously the scrapmen was keen on scrapping very expensive money making bits of material. Now obviously they're going to be brass or bronze, are they, the pistons? No. This is all the steel. The most expensive thing on a steam engine when they were being scrapped in the 1960s was the firebox. Oh really?
The firebox on a lot of locomotives which were built for the London Midland and the Scottish and also for the British Rail locomotives were made of bronze.
Yeah.
And they were actually, because these engines were all sold as a weight of steel.
Oh, okay.
And what happened was, when they were being scrapped, they realised that the fireboxes were worth 3 times as much as steel. So of course what was happening was, steel was being, left to one side, but they wanted the fireboxes because that's where the money was to be made.
Yeah.
Luckily, all our steam locomotives, Brocklebank, Sir Freddie Pyle, they've all got steel fireboxes. So this is why they weren't so quick to scrap these ones, because they weren't worth their weight in gold.
They survived. Now obviously that yard we talked about earlier down in Barry in Wales, was it?
That's right, yes.
Now, we was lucky that the chap who was involved in that managed to save quite a few engines, didn't he?
Well, the reason that Di Woodhams saved these locomotives, he never had the intention of saving them. He bought them to make money to scrap them. But what it is, when you scrap a steam locomotive, it takes a team of probably 4 men nearly a week to actually cut up a steam locomotive. But during the 1960s, and certainly the late 1960s, there was a big modernisation programme on British Railways, which meant that all the coal trucks, which are basically 4 panels of steel, sitting over the top of a steel double-axled frame, they could be cut up by 2 men in just a couple of hours. And he had thousands of these. And so basically, he put the steam engines to one side, still with the intention of scrapping them, but then all these thousands of wagons needed to be done, and then whilst they were being cut up, you suddenly found he's into the 1970s. And this is when steam preservation started to take off, because we realised that the only steam engines left in the country were at Barry Scrapyard. And this is where a mad rush started down to Barry, and that's when Di Woodhams turned round and suddenly thought, hey up, I might just save these, and that is when people were able to go down there and purchase these engines.
Fantastic. Now obviously he's a money making person, but he realised the value in these sort of thing when people started coming down and giving him phone calls, didn't he? So
Yes, he did. I mean, Di Woodhams, you could go up and you could talk to him over a cup of tea, as long as you went and saw him and had a chat with him. He was an absolute gentleman. But he was a businessman at the end of the day. And he did realise that obviously he could sell these steam engines for more than what he bought them for from British Railways.
Fantastic. Sorry, go on.
But at the same time, you know, he was a businessman. So, you know, if they hadn't have been purchased during the early 1970s, they would have been scrapped.
Did you actually meet the man himself?
Yes, I had the privilege to meet him. Yes, over a cup of tea. Not a long chat, but just a quick one. If you went in there to the office and asked permission to go in and sort of like said good morning, and then sometimes you might just get the card checked in the afternoon just to see if there's any other bits of steel which are gone. But you could buy basically anything.
Fantastic. And shall we move on now, Pete? Perhaps to the one next door to it, shall we?
Certainly.
Now this one's undercover, Peter.
Now this locomotive here is Sidmouth 34010. Now she was sent for scrap in 1964 and sent down to Barry Scrapyard, and we've had her for a number of years. And basically she's been at the back end of the queue all the time when it's come to restoration. But now what is going to happen is this locomotive and Sir Frederick Parle are going to be going down to Hurston at the same time at the end of 2024, and are both going to be restored side by side. They're both of a similar class, although this one is a West Country, Sir Frederick Parle is a Battle of Britain class. They're both absolutely identical. And so when we set the tooling up for one locomotive, it makes sense to set it up for the second one. So we're going to restore both of them side by side. What we've been doing here is making sure the frame is correctly cleaned and she's nearly ready to go down to Hurston. But as we go round to the back of the locomotive, I'll show you the type of work that we need to do.
I was going to ask you, that was the question on my mind. How do you clean the steel? Do you needle gun it, or do you sandblast it, or do you...
Sometimes you can just be, you know, with a hammer and chisel.
A chip and hammer,
you know,
or something
yeah,
like
it takes time.
Yep.
It's not something that can be done over 5 minutes.
No.
So this is when you're working on these locomotives, you're touching them.
Yes.
You're feeling them, and you get to know them. You get to know their personality, and this is when you fall in love with them.
Exactly. Well, I'm glad you said that, because I'm passionate about the feel of things. You know, that's when you fall in love with it. Let's face it, we fall in young with a young lady because we're touching her, aren't we? And we do the same with an engine, isn't it? And you see all the past, and on like military equipment, you see the battle scars from it, and you'll see the battle scars from this as well, also, didn't you?
Yes, most certainly you can. And I mean, like this one, none of this was built by computer.
No. Everything
was built by hand. And so every time you're working on something, it might be a slight, small adjustment, which is slightly different. You know, so that both locomotives, although they're identical, they're not identical. They're both separate in their own ways.
Quite right, what they said. I mean, the one we looked at earlier, they was riveted on these archways,
right.
And these are welded on. So
this is a lightweight Pacific. What we saw earlier on was a Merchant Navy, which is a heavyweight Pacific. It's a Class A. This is a Class 7 locomotive. Yep. Now this one, when we spoke earlier on, I said about the Merchant Navies were built purely and simply for fast passenger. These were built for mixed, so they could run freight and they could also run passenger services.
Yeah.
And these ones were used on the lighter lines. So like when you're going down to places like Padstow, you would use the Merchant Navy to get down to Exeter, and then from Exeter, when it used to go out on a line called the Withered Arm, this is when the light Pacifics were coming, because this weight all has to be transferred through the driving wheels.
Yep.
And the reason is it's the weight on the rail that matters. And so these light Pacifics could get to all the little places where the Merchant Navies couldn't.
Fantastic. Let's have a woman around, and like you said, you're going to tell me of what the work involved in this sort of thing.
Now here, this is the rear end of Sidmouth's frames. So right the way down the front is where the cylinders are. What you have here, this is where the cab sits. And what we're doing here is we're putting in a new drag box. And this drag box basically is where all the weight of the coaches behind and the tender behind connect to the locomotive. So this is why we have to make sure that this is bolted on and riveted on correctly. because all the weight, 600, 700 tons, will be going through this piece of metal.
Oh, all right.
And what we're going to do now is we're going to be putting this onto the back of the locomotive, and then the frames are then ready to go down to Hurston to start her overhaul.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate this, and we'll move on to something else I'm soon. That's nice. So we go. Look, fantastic.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Morning, Alan. How are you going?
Right, where are we going now, Pete?
Right, well what we'll do,
Only come here when it's freezing cold.
we'll take you over and show you.
Yes, the bogey over there,
Yeah.
shall we? Now, I've got dodgy ankles, so I'm going to be... What you like when you touch this? You good?
Yeah, that's a bit.
Okay then, Pete. Now, what we got in front of us now?
These here are the driving wheels for Brocklebank line. Now, a lot of people don't realise it, but these locomotives actually have tyres.
Really?
Now, what you have an inner wheel, which is cast. And what you have on the outside, which is this bit, which is actually a steel tyre. And over the period of years, these tyres get worn down. And so what they have to do, they have to remove the tyre and then put a new one on. We're very lucky with Brocklebank that, as you can see, she's still got years of life left in her. And what they have to make sure of is what they call the profile.
Yeah.
Now, for any of you that have got Triang toys at home or Hornby Railways, you know that the way that a steam locomotive or a model stays on the line is the fact it has to be guided through the rails. And that is why this profile here is so important, because the whole point is that this outer part of the tyre stays on the inside of the track. And so it's very important to make sure that this profile is maintained.
Is it a square profile or a curved profile?
It's slightly curvature.
Radiused, yeah.
Yeah, so it will allow the locomotive to actually stay within the track, and that is very important.
Fantastic. Now, quick one there. You say it's got tyres on. Now, normally if we go to a tyre fitter and he puts a new tyre on for us, now how do you put a new tyre on something like this? Do you heat it up and freeze it, or?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, basically, it's all down to heat. Basically, this tyre will eventually come off. It's taken off the steel, and then when you put it back on, it's heated up, laid over the top of the cast wheel, and then it will allow shrinkage as soon as it starts to get cold.
Now tell me, I mean, in engineering we call it a thou per inch and that sort of thing. So what sort of interference fit would this be on, as in thousandths of an inch or metric style sort of thing?
Unfortunately, you've got me on that one.
I've got Peter. Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah.
Pete. It's definitely an interference fit anyway.
Yeah,
we'll leave it at that, shall we?
It is a tight fit, so really there's no space between the tyre and the wheel.
Right.
So it is a tight fit.
Right. So obviously these are the driving wheels.
Yes.
Now you have the small bogey wheels at the front.
Yes.
Oh, right behind us. There's the bogey there. Now, does that do the steering as effect?
Yes, this assists the locomotive to steer. So if you like, this sort of like just guides it, because it's connected to the locomotive frames at the front here by one central pin. And so basically it just helps and guides the locomotive.
It pivots just on that little central pin, does it?
Yes, it does. Yeah. And these are the front bogies for Brocklebank line.
Oh, okay.
So being a Pacific, you have 4 wheels at the front, well, 2 axles.
Yep.
Then you have 3 main driving axles, and then you have another axle at the back, which is what the rear pony truck.
Oh, okay. And that's so you all together you got 3, 5, 6, 7, 8 wheels in.
Yes.
Well, each side 8 wheels, obviously. Sorry, I'm talking about the cobblers there. I know. Sorry. You put me right, Peter.
You've got 6 wheels
Fantastic.
on each side.
Yeah.
Yes.
4 in the front and 4 in the back.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
We got there in the end.
Yeah.
Sorry for my thickness. I think the word is. So these have been put on here or in down at Hurstmere or where you said?
We will probably put these back on here.
You'll put them on here?
Yes.
And you need a crane for that, obviously?
Yes, we will.
Now, we talk about expenditure of insurance costs, crane costs, that sort of thing. Now, we got to ask the question, where do you get the money from?
We get it from our shareholders. Basically, when you join Southern Locomotives Limited, basically you can buy a share. And that means you can buy part of this locomotive.
Yep.
You become a part owner of the locomotive.
Oh, okay.
And so, yes, our shareholders then put the money forward, and that helps us to actually rebuild the locomotives. But then what we do, we hire our locomotives to privately preserved railways. And so then the railway, in return for the use of our engine, pays us a hire fee, which then we put away to one side, which then goes towards the 10-year overhaul, which it has to have every 10 years.
And do you have open days on these, on your societies? Not here.
No, we don't do any open days here. This is basically our private site. So, you know, if you come down here, if you get in contact with me and you want to volunteer, then yes, by all means, become a member, you know, and then, you know, we can get you down here to assist us.
And can I put your phone number in the description below?
Yes, of course.
Or your contact details, let's put it that way?
Yeah.
Fantastic. And remember, this bogie on the back there, is that part of the same engine, is it?
Yes, it is. This is the rear pony truck.
Ah, okay. Oh, and it's got a single pivot on the back again, isn't it?
Well, this is basically what sits underneath the cab. So the cab is sitting above here.
Yeah.
And this is the rear pony truck.
Yeah.
And above here is what I showed you earlier on, where the drag box is, and then behind it is where the tender would be.
That's with all the coal and the water and
That's
everything.
correct.
Like.
And then behind us, what we have here is a brand new set of wheels for one of our tenders.
Oh,
This will be a new tender which we're going to be building, and these are brand new wheels which have been manufactured for it. And as you can see here, you can see the size of the tyre, and then on here, this is where the axle box goes.
Well, in fact, I mean, you're telling me about all this being remanufactured or whatnot. So there is still companies in the world that we could still do heavy engineering, is there?
We still have some of the best engineering companies in the world. It's as simple as that. We have the experience, we have the knowledge to do it. So yes, this is why we want to keep engineering going within the UK.
Fantastic. That's a good part to end on this specific video at the moment. So moving on to these ones in the background. Now apparently someone tells me, Peter, they're here just resting for the time being, are they?
Yes, they are. Yeah, these locomotives actually came from Finland. I was involved in bringing them down from Finland back in 1990, and we took them out the strategic reserve from Finland, and basically they were covered in a substance called dinitrol. They were all complete. We towed them nearly 200 miles on the main line down through to Helsinki, loaded them onto a cargo ship and brought them across to the UK. And at the moment they're just awaiting what's going to happen to them. So yes, at the moment they're having a bit of a sleep.
Fantastic. Well, hope you enjoyed that video. Now Peter's give a good description of what they're doing down here, and this is going to be part one, obviously, and then we're going to do maybe part two, maybe even part three, you never know, of the lifting of the tender. But let's not make these videos too long for us, and if you like the video, don't forget, as I said before, like the video, and if you haven't already, think about subscribing. Anyway, see you in part two. Thanks for coming along. Cheers for now.